All right. Hey, Charm and Alyssa, how's it going?
Pretty fast.
Hey.
I'm so excited for this episode. I'm like actually really, really excited to have this conversation because, yeah, folks, we're talking about locational astrology. We're talking about the astrology of where you are on this blue sphere that we inhabit. Um, so before we get started, of course, I need to introduce my awesome guests. Charm has already been on the show twice, three times? Twice,
Twice.
twice. Okay. I've been seeing you with fresh voices and then my show, so I'm getting a little confused. So yeah, you might remember Charm from episode, I believe it was number 5,
From
or number
season 1.
6. I think it was number 5,
Mm-hmm.
which was all about Venus with Diana Rose Harper. And then again for episode 13,
13.
the BTS episode.
So
So
much
welcome
fun.
back, Charm. Thank you so much for coming back.
No, thank you so much for inviting me. I'm so excited. And I'm so excited to do this with Alyssa.
I know this is gonna be so good, you guys. Okay. So Charm, can you you do not have to share your SMR, but yeah, I won't say anything else. You won't have to share your SMR, but what we are going to do today is share our lines, that the astrocartography lines that we are living on. So Charm, if you wouldn't mind sharing what line you're on.
Yeah, so I'm joining everyone. So I'm originally from Philippines and immigrated to Toronto and a long time ago, about like 2 decades ago now. And that made me move to a Mars IC line and actually have a really Martian like story about it because a week into our landing, and right next door to our apartment, there was a literal fire that basically just started at like 4 a.m. And I was like a teenager, like a newcomer, an immigrant, and was like, I had to call 911 because I opened the door and there was just like smoke and we had to actually evacuate. And we were living at, like a high rise, very high immigrant population, kind of high rise downtown. And I was like, wow, when I first learned about astrocartography and planetary lines, I was like, that was my Mars IC line. And I've never experienced fire in a home. So that was really interesting. So I'm currently in a Mars IC line. And over the years, that has really expressed itself in ways that I want to move away from it. So that's
And
what
your
I'll
Mars
share
is
for
super
now.
strong too in
Yeah.
your chart. So that's even, yeah. Wow. Okay.
Yeah.
That's wild. Um, what else? I mean, oh yeah, tell us a little bit about your practice.
Oh, yes.
What do you
Sorry.
do?
I am a professional astrologer and tarot reader. I have been doing consultations with clients. My practice is a Virgo, so I started in September 2017, and I would say that's really what I love doing the most, is being able to sit with people and do consultations. At this point, I do that about maybe about 70% of my work is through consultation. The rest are like writing oriented type of astrology work, which actually also, like, I think sometimes consultations can feel emotionally taxing. And so it's nice to be able to diversify my work. But at this point, I do want to keep building that practice because I feel like I'm still relatively new to the to our astrological community of offering services. But prior to that, and still currently, I have had like a 12-year practice as a community health nurse, and I feel like that actually really what enabled me to be ready to sit with people in like a like a one-on-one space, because a lot of my past experience has been working in like sexual assault and domestic violence, a lot of mental health and trauma care, harm reduction, LGBTQ primary care. So that's been like my history in terms of working in community health in the capacity of a registered nurse. And so that actually really prepared me to be an astrologer today. So,
Thank you so much for sharing that. I love that you shared that because that even though you've been on here twice, that was the first time you shared that. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that. And yeah, it just speaks so much to like, yeah, your the way you are also, but also like your practice and just like what, I don't know, just what your whole like practice is sort of oriented towards, and like just your whole vibe. I
Oh,
love it.
thank you. Thank you.
You're so sweet. Um, what else was I gonna say? Oh, and we know each other. How we knew each other on Twitter, right? That must have
Yeah,
been it.
definitely internet, like the warm, friendly Astro Twitter. But
Yeah.
also, we were able to
Norwalk.
meet in person at Norwalk 2019
Yeah.
the pandemic happened. So that was really nice to be able to meet in person
Yeah.
in
That was
Seattle.
great. We had it was just really, so Charm and I have the same ascendant degree, and so every time it was just like this really weird, beautiful, like oh, I don't know. There's something about people who have the same ascendant degree as you, or even
Yeah.
planets on that degree, where you just it feels so comfortable and so like I've been here before, sort of thing. It's like oh yeah, I don't know. It doesn't feel
And
like
I
a new
think
person.
and I think often I would find that we would be like saying the same thing and then also, oh, like yeah, if you like it, I'm sure I like it too.
I love
Because of
that. I
that
love that.
resonance. Yeah.
And one of our all of our teachers, Sam Reynolds, also shares that with us too, which is kind of cool. And a couple
Oh,
other astrologers. There's like two, three other astrologers I can think of. So it's wild. But anyway,
I forget about his rising sign.
I know. I don't, because we have way too much in common in terms of our chart. So it's like, yeah, that plus five other things. But anyway, yeah, thanks for sharing,
Oh,
Charm.
my
Alyssa,
pleasure.
welcome to the astrology show.
Hey, I'm so
I'm like,
excited to be
finally.
here.
Yes. I'm just so stoked that you're finally here. Yeah. So tell us, if you don't mind sharing your SMR, we'd love to hear that, and also a little bit more about your practice.
So, I'm an Aquarius sun, a Cancer moon, and a Leo rising. And I am on my Venus midheaven line, which is a super sweet place to be. It has manifested in um, long car rides and stopping whenever there's like a beautiful view and just taking tons of scenic pictures.
Mm.
Beautiful.
And I run Praxis Astrology and also do a fun little happy hour called Drunk Astrology Happy Hour.
It is not just an hour.
It is hours
Half a
upon
day.
hours
Yeah.
It's a
Yeah,
half
it's a
day.
day.
that both you and Charm have been on. Charm did the astrology of BTS, and Kirah, you did like the most wonderful Venusian performance I've ever seen.
Mm.
Thank you. Yeah. Yeah, guys, I basically like recited the Orphic hymn to Venus in lingerie and smoked a joint
Oh,
for everyone as my presentation. It was
that's
great. It
beautiful.
was fun. So yeah, practice astrology. And we know each other. How do we know it? I guess just through the internet.
Yeah, I think just through the internet, through like being kind of in the same astrological places, I think we definitely got closer on
Oh
Clubhouse.
yeah. Thank God for
Um,
Clubhouse.
yeah.
Yeah.
I never went to Norwalk, so I'm one of those like astro floaty people that has never experienced the mysticism of it.
You will.
One
You
of
will.
these
You
days.
will one day, and you'll see.
I came across your work, Alyssa, when I was attending the Queer Astrology conference last year, right? That was
Yeah.
2020.
Yeah, that was like June.
Um, and it was around the when you were before your presentation, the speeches. So that's how I came across it, and I just followed you. It was just a natural osmosis, and then you know, created the first Drunk Astrology gathering or conference. We have so many different names for it, and yeah, that's such a beautiful space that you created.
It is. It's like so needed. Tell us a little bit more about your practice. Like, type of offerings you have?
So I focus in natal chart readings and locational astrology. And my practice has honestly, I did not think that I would become an astrologer. I have been organizing since I was 16 years old. I think movement work has been the place where I feel the most comfortable. And then 2020 hit and just rerouted my entire life. I had my Saturn return, and all of a sudden people wanted readings from me. And before I was giving them for free, and I was like, let me organize this in a different way. And people have been coming ever since. And so I use a lot of traditional techniques to talk about liberation and to kind of like encourage radical self-acceptance. And so my practice has been mostly consultations and writing on Patreon and just looking at the transits and being one with the stars.
Love it. Thank you so much. And you two just know each other through the internet then, right?
Yes, yeah. I mean, I
Cool.
feel like I'm going towards the West Coast. It's just a matter of time that
Please.
we're gonna share
It's all gonna,
space.
I think it's gonna be like, yeah, West Coast of the United States. It's like the astrology mecca. Um, I think it's just happening. And it's us millennials, it's the Pluto and Scorpios who are like really making that a thing. There's something about, well, I should say what line I'm on. So
Oh yeah.
I was born on my Mercury midheaven line and also very close to my Jupiter descendant line. Um, and so, yeah, those two planets are angular for me natally, but for the first time ever, I moved away from those lines and I'm now on my Neptune ascendant line. Um, and yeah, it's been interesting. I really love LA. It's very, I don't know, it feels very enchanted to me. Like it's just so beautiful to me. And just driving around during sunset, especially, I'm just like, wow, this doesn't feel real. Like it really does feel unreal. When I call it La La Land, it's like very much La La Land for me. Like, um, I've only been here for a couple of months and I haven't been in any scenes yet. I haven't like gone to any parties or anything. No celebrity sighting. So I haven't seen that side of Neptune yet, but we'll see. We'll see once things start opening up.
Mm.
And yeah, I'm sure we'll talk about it a little bit more. Okay, you guys, should we get into it? Should we start talking about it? Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I think to start off, I would love to hear how both of you got into locational astrology and how you sort of like, yeah, picked this niche and why. And sort of, I know you both probably have some personal kind of stories or anecdotes around that. So I'd love to hear that. Alyssa, do you want to start?
Yeah, so I got into locational astrology almost like accidentally. And so I had gone to an anti-war protest in the city and signed up for this kind of like lunchtime learning astrology thing at Heel House in Brooklyn. And the workshop was on locational astrology. And so I went to this protest and it sucked. Like, there weren't many people there. It seemed like there wasn't a lot of conversation about like what war meant and what it meant, like what it means for people. And so I like left feeling super demoralized. And then I go into this workshop run by Elizabeth Smith, who's a modern psychological astrologer. And I was just expecting to be kind of like entertained, like,
Mm.
oh, this is like a place where I go on vacation or, like what a
Mm.
little thing. And like immediately we started talking and we were talking about the US Pluto return and the Saturn Pluto conjunction because it was right as it was happening.
Mm.
Mm.
Um, and the workshop was completely illuminating. I went home and looked at my chart, and I felt insurmountable grief over the effects of war and imperialism and borders. And I also immediately read myself and found out so much about my relationships and my friendships. And that's how I got started. I took Nitty Gritty Astrology 2 with Sam Reynolds, who is very talented at this astrology and all astrology. Sam is a wonderful teacher. And just have been reading about it, practicing it on clients ever since.
Awesome. Yeah, it's been so cool to like get to know you over Clubhouse over the past couple months. Question mark. I guess it's been a couple months.
Yeah.
And just like, yeah, hear you talk about locational. It's always just like, whoa, taking it to another level. And both of you are, and I think we'll talk about that, but like how this is so needed in astrology right now. More perspectives, different perspectives on things that we haven't had a lot of perspectives on in terms of like locational. And by that I mean like, well, we'll get into it when we talk about like sort of the history and but first I want to hear Charm's story about getting into locational.
Before I say that, actually, just want to say, I remember when, Alyssia, when you started really talking about locational astrology, at least on the Twitter space, Astro Twitter, and I was just filled with so much excitement because for the longest time, it had felt like I really didn't have many like peers to talk with. And so I remember I was like, oh yeah, and that was actually how I got into studying with Sam Reynolds as well, because we were talking about teachers and the lack thereof. And so I'm just so excited that you have really taken on this like exciting interest in locational astrology. I definitely feel like we need more folks, with like really critical sociopolitical voices to be able to talk about it well. So yeah, I'm really excited.
Yeah,
I hope
I'm
some of those
so glad
people are
we're in this
listening.
together, Charm.
Yeah, I'm so happy. I feel like very blessed to be just here in this container with you two at the same time right now. So,
I
yeah, I'm
love
stoked
it.
about it.
It has such a Venus Kazemi vibe right now. Um,
True.
in terms of how I got into it, so when I first received my very first astrology reading, so I wasn't like a student, or I was just like I was queer, and as queer people, it's one of those like almost like a prerequisite to like know your astrology and your charts. I was like, okay, I better get into that. So I got my first astrology reading, and the first astrologer who gave me Julia Bayer actually during that session printed my relocated chart, and I was like, what is this? I have never, I was entering the space being like, oh, what's my moon sign? Like I had no idea what in my early 20s I had no idea what even a birth chart is. So basically she just blew my mind, and from then on I just felt like as I started studying astrology more on my own and then seriously, I realized the utility of locational astrology as a way to actually, in a way, make sense of and manage a lot of my, like sort of immigration grief that I feel like I'm still processing until now, because I was actually born on a Uranus midheaven line, like exactly. And the way my departure happened, in my Filipino family, there isn't a lot of good communication that happens. And my parents have been applying to leave Philippines for a while, for many years, but they didn't tell me until like 3 months before we were leaving.
Wow.
And, you know, I was already 17 years old. I had like made plans with my best friends about like our future after we graduated high school. So it really felt like that was when Pluto actually was exactly on my Uranus during our immigration. So that was quite like a life change, you know, like a complete 180. And what's interesting about being from that part of the world, you know, my chart literally does a 180 flip as well in terms of a relocated chart. So it's been an interesting way to like, and you know, actually during the introduction, I talked about being on a Mars IC line. I'm actually also in an Chiron MC line in the ninth house. So it's interesting, even the histories of how I got into, you know, studying like nursing, studying, getting into the kind of nursing work that I got into in like my youth, and my interest in sort of, I guess, pursuing a kind of healing trajectory professionally. And in a way, I think I was just really fumbling and figuring out how to like feel out my grief about losing that life, and all the relationships that I lost along the way. And so that's how I got into locational astrology, is through grief. And I feel like in some ways, these are the kinds of creative, you know, like processes people could engage in using this type of astrology, not just so much as like for enjoyment.
Mhm.
So, you know, which I feel like we will talk a lot about.
Yes. Do you have something to say, Alyssa?
Yeah, I mean, Charm, I love how you're talking about your immigration grief because um in my astrocartography lines, I'm Afro-Puerto Rican and Indo-Guyanese, and I have a Sun Jupiter line running right through both of those places.
Mm,
And I feel like for me, seeing that and kind of like tracking my own ancestry and being able to see like how some of those aspects have played out in my life, and also grappling with, I think, like devastation around, you know, being a child of immigrants, but growing up in a super small town where being an immigrant was not necessarily celebrated, or, you know, a lot of my food was weird, or,
mm,
you
mhm,
know, even my parents tried as much as they could to assimilate in a lot of ways.
mhm,
And seeing, I think, especially Jupiter there and relearning how to take up space was like a part of my locational astrology journey.
Mhm.
mhm, mhm. No,
Wow.
it's real, and I feel like that living in my Mars IC line really to me embodies like a lot of the heartbreak and the pain of like separation from, you know, like your roots, where you come from, but even how it expressed itself as like really hard conflict with my own family, being here away from where we
Mm.
came from. But yeah.
Thank you both so much for sharing. Yeah, I think it's important to just to hear those stories and to hear like why people get into this type of astrology, and it's not just about traveling to a line to find love, which
Mhm.
it can totally be about that too. But you know, shit goes deep.
Mhm.
It goes deep, and it's yeah, I just really appreciate you two sharing your stories. Um, yeah, I'm like, I don't I my parent we go far back here, I guess. My family lines, by here I mean in the US. But it's also true that I don't know much about my ancestry, past, you know, a couple generations.
Mhm.
We've done some um research, and by we I mean one of my sisters, my my dad had 5 kids before me and my younger sister. So I know like one of my older sisters and maybe brothers have looked into it as far as like my dad's side of the family. And it's just very confusing, you know, because it's like, but there's some idea, but I did just get 23andMe as a Christmas gift that came in at the end of March, thanks to my sad mom who procrastinates somehow worse than I do. Um,
I love it.
but I'm very grateful that she sent it to me because I'm excited. I did like ancestry.com maybe like over 10 years ago, and the results kind of confused me. So I'm excited to see now that it's, more, it's probably going to be a little bit more accurate. And yeah, but the fact that I was born on these 2 very angular lines, and we'll get into this, but like 2 planets that are in detriment, and
Mm,
just the discomfort I've always felt in that part of the country,
mm,
and physical discomfort, especially like the environment,
mm,
just being at times really nice. Like humidity is actually feels good to me a lot of the times, but the coldness is just something that my body just couldn't take anymore. So the thought of moving to a place where the ruler of the first house is now in domicile,
mm,
um, and it's been great. Like, I'm still cold all the time. I still have, chronic illnesses and shit. It's not like that changed, but it is so much more comfortable just to be here. Like, by far, the fact that I can, like, I was taking walks in January in a t-shirt, like, that it can't beat. My body likes it a lot more. But we'll get into the specifics of dignity in a bit. I want to talk a little bit about, well, kind of like a little history, just kind of like, because astrocartography and locational astrology isn't something that's been around for forever. This isn't like some Hellenistic shit we're talking about. This is like very, very recent, right? And I mean, definitely in the past century. So yeah, I would love to hear. Well, first, I would love to hear like, I think you guys both said your main teachers were Sam Reynolds.
mhm. I also learned from Moses Siragar the third,
Okay.
who's someone who I think that's definitely his specialty. And then I also am currently enrolled with Sam Reynolds.
Right, because Moses is the one person I knew of before I knew Sam did it, and before like even you two came on the scene with Locational. I was like the only person I know of is Moses, um, and I haven't learned from him, but I heard him on podcasts. I think he was on the astrology podcast at some point, and he did do like this free webinar that was helpful. But Moses is one of those people who can synthesize both a sidereal and a tropical chart at once.
Mhm,
And he's very proficient in both, like Vedic astrology and tropical astrology. And
mhm,
so when he's doing his delineations, it's like kind of he combines all these things together, and it's very amazing, but a little hard to grasp if you don't, especially if you're like more of a newbie to astrology. Um, but yeah, that's like the only other person I really knew of before I knew Sam did it. And I know a couple other people do it. I had a reading from Anne Ortley once, and she pulled up my relocated chart for California back then. And so
mm.
yeah, I've known of it, but yeah, it's
I
just
think
cool
Jen
to
Zart also
Gensart,
does.
yes.
Yeah, so I was gonna give a shout out to Genzart
Please,
because
Mm,
yes.
I think when you're learning locational astrology, it's actually really hard to know who's teaching what.
Right.
mhm,
And Jen, I did a tutoring session with her, and I was just kind of like, this is the way I do it. I really feel like I need something else. Like, what is it? And Jen was like, you're amazing at it. And I was like, oh, like, I just have imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
And
mm,
Jen is
mm,
so awesome and proficient and really was
Really
like a
smart.
great teacher for me in that
Yeah.
respect of kind of like owning my shit and being like,
Mm.
you
That's
know,
great.
acknowledging that there is a little bit of divination alongside the technique in using this part of astrology.
Yeah,
I've been
Jen is
meaning
brilliant.
to I've been
Sorry, go
meaning
ahead.
to access her Norwalk presentation on
Yeah,
astrocartography. I
I
think it
was
was
in it
2020.
as an example. I attended it. Um, yeah. So thank you so much for bringing up Jen's art because it was last year, NORAC 2020, when I found out Jen's art does locational as well, and she did a whole lecture about it. It was super helpful. And yeah, this was before I moved to California. So you can hear us talk a little bit about being on a Neptune line. I think about it every day, honestly, what she said. And then also talked to Sam about it in like in a reading. So yeah, you guys both learned from a couple different teachers, but Alyssa, can you speak to like the person who sort of like founded this branch? I wouldn't really call is it a branch of astrology? It's no, because it's under natal, but it's like kind of like a subset of natal
It's definitely
astrology.
niche.
Yeah, it's a niche.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I feel like there's some, I'm trying to think, like there's some aspects of it, like geodetics, which like
Mm.
we shouldn't go into that aren't natal.
Mm-hmm.
And then some people like to include like the charts of places, like their
Right.
synastry with it. And so like I think it's a niche.
It's a
I feel like
niche.
locational astrology is the umbrella, and then all these little astrocartography and relocated charts is like in the umbrella. That's how I think of it.
That makes sense. I was just
But
thinking like between the four branches, like because the idea is all astrology falls in between these four branches of astrology, right? Like horary, electional, natal, and
Mundane.
mundane. Thank you. I did them in like the worst order, but so yeah, in that case, I think locational will probably fall under natal, but it's very much like I want to draw like a Venn diagram or something, or like a graph, because it would be like this niche off to the side that maybe combines a couple other things. But
Mhm.
anyway, continue what you were going to go into the person who brought us this stuff.
yeah, so Jim Lewis is the kind of like creator of this technique. He was an astrologer in the 1970s who had the idea of putting planets culminating and descending and all of that onto a map and wrote this book, The Psychology of Astrocartography. He is or was a white gay man from San Francisco and really gave us like the blueprint. And I think it's up to folks like us to kind of give a blueprint that is more inclusive of racial justice, more inclusive of like expressions outside of the gender binary,
Mhm.
and to incorporate our immigration and our like other diverse experiences. And so while Jim is the blueprint, I think that there is a lot of work to be done in the field.
Mhm.
Mhm. Mhm.
Thanks for that. Yeah. So you said he wrote that book around in the 70s.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, this is it's still it's a baby subject within astrology itself, which is pretty cool. Um, yeah, and it's cool that, like you said, it's finally kind of making its way into more people. So we get more different types of voices, more variety of voices talking about this. Um, awesome. So what's the book called again?
It's called The Psychology of Astrocartography.
Cool.
And there's other books out there. Um, I definitely think there's books on like local space. Michael Irwine is the creator of local space charts. There's Astrolocality by
Martin Davis.
Martin Davis that has been really
Mhm.
helpful. There's a book by Frank Kazi that's also helpful in like kind of like conceptualizing and thinking about the planets in their
Mhm.
locations.
So let's like define some of these terms. So, like you said, locational astrology is sort of the umbrella, right? And then we
Mhm.
have astrocartography, we have like relocated charts. You said we have
Mhm.
local space, we have a couple of different things. So,
Mhm.
Charm, do you want to take a stab at it, like kind of doing the
Sure.
what locational astrology is as an umbrella, and then sort of astrocartography, local space, and um, relocated charts, because that's kind of the three main ones, right? Unless I'm forgetting something, please add it.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, when few people call it, I know Sam Reynolds calls it astrolocality. I've just started calling it locational astrology because it
Mhm.
felt like, oh, that's a good term.
Yeah, I
um,
feel like it's easier to understand.
without getting into the mess of like the trademarked term. But what I call it as like the different locational astrology tools, essentially. So the astrocartography map, which is what Jim Lewis essentially trademarked, is that how you project your chart, so your natal chart, onto the world map. And that's how you're able to really kind of witness how laid out all the planets and the different points, like including the lunar nodes in your chart, rise, culminate, set, and anti-culminate, throughout. Because definitely the premise of locational astrology is that your birth moment can be spatially replicated. And so that astrocartography map lays that out. But you always want to look at an astrocartography map with a relocated chart, because the relocated chart will show us more details. So, because in the astrocartography map, we're really looking at how planets become angular. So, how they're, close to the ascendant, midheaven, descendant, IC. But the relocated chart will actually tell us how things shifted. And so in a way, the aspects and the kind of relationship your planets have in your birth chart will always remain the same even when you relocate it, even when you relocate. However, their house placement and their relationship to the angles can shift, and that's the new information we're really looking into. You mentioned, Alyssa, that the geodetics you don't get into. I actually started getting into geodetic charts through the tutorship of Sam Reynolds, but it's interesting to me to also pull up a geodetic chart wherein it shows fixed angles on each like places in the world, which in itself has like some interesting, colonial, really like unpacking that in terms of colonialism. But it's interesting the concept of how a geodetic chart, as Sam Reynolds explains it, is how a place receives you or how a place experiences you, as opposed as to a relocated chart is how you experience a place. So that it's an interesting, even like just imagining what that means, like that flow of energy.
Mhm.
And then the fourth one is the planetary crossings or the planetary parents. And this is where in the astrocartography map, where you see two angular planets or placements really intersecting. And in that intersection, you can feel that throughout the whole latitude across that Earth.
Mhm.
And obviously, it kind of mirrors in terms of northern versus southern hemisphere. And then the last one is the local space horizon or the local space chart, which I feel like Alyssa has some really creative ways of actually working with that. So there's about five, like a five
Okay,
locational astrology tools. So
that's so
astrocartography
cool.
map, which is when you hear people call, I'm in my Venus line, that's what it is.
And we'll
Like we're
take a look
talking
at
about.
it if you're watching the video version. Um,
Mhm.
yeah.
And then yeah, so astrocartography map, relocated chart, the geodetic chart, planetary crossings or parents, and then local space horizon chart.
I always like to say, your relocated chart, basically what we're looking at, because this is like the only thing I'll pull up a relocated chart in client sessions, but rarely am I looking at the map. It's usually like I'm thinking about moving to Berlin, and I'll be like, let's look at it. Let's just see what's up. But your relocated chart, I think, very simply put, is we're looking at the chart as if you were born in that exact same moment of time, but in a different part of the world. So you were born wherever you were born at that moment in time. If we could, in that split second that you were born, just beam you to another part of the world, we're looking at the chart for that place. The time is the same. It might not be the same time in terms of, time zones might be different, but that moment in time is the same. That's why
Exactly.
you have to like do a relocated chart and calculate it, because 1:20 p.m. in Philadelphia is going to be a different time. It's going to be 10:20 a.m. in LA.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're watching the video version on YouTube, one, please subscribe. Two,
Click that
I
subscribe button.
smash that subscribe button. Yeah. Anyway, I wanted to show how to pull up your kind of all the different tools that you can use on astro.com. So there's this website, astro.com, aka AstroDienst, and you can do a whole plethora of stuff here for free. So it's a great tool. But for now, I'm going to show how to pull up your astrocartography map. We should start there, right? So what you want to do is go to astro.com. I would create a profile, just like log in or whatever. You want to hover over the free horoscopes tab. And then all the way, there's 3 columns. The right column, you want to go, sorry, I'm used to telling people how to go to extended chart selection. We'll go there next. In the middle column, at the very bottom, there's a button called Astro Click Travel. You want to click that, and you'll see a map of the world come up with all these beautiful colored lines intersecting and running through it. So, Alyssia, do you want to describe what we're looking at?
Yes. And so you see these different colored lines and they're rising, which means they are, ascending, and then they're falling, descending. And then you see these lines going up and down, and they're culminating and anti-culminating. And so when those are the lines for your astrocartography. And so something Char mentioned before is that there's also planetary parents. And so when you click a place, you might get a line, and then on AstroDienst, if you scroll a little bit up to the top more after you click a location.
Wait, oh, here.
Yeah. So you're gonna be hitting show details up
Mhm.
there.
Oh, okay.
And then
Oh,
you'll see
oh.
the parents that
Mhm.
are also contributing to your experience of the place.
Mhm.
Wow.
And Jim Lewis explained that the planetary lines, like the astrocartography map lines, are definitely the more powerful influence. Um, but in comparison, the planetary crossings, where those lines intersect, um, of course, when you live near it, it's very powerful. But because the idea is that, for example, on our screen right now, we can see that,
This is Ethiopia.
you know, in this chart, actually, if you don't mind zooming in again,
Yeah.
um, that Neptune, the purple Neptune DC line,
Mm-hmm. Which means
intersecting with
Neptune
the
on
moon.
the descendant.
Yeah, Neptune DC descendant line and the moon MC midheaven line intersect somewhere there. And in that latitude, that's a combination that technically you would feel that throughout all around the world.
And
And
that
so
and that
if you live
longitude,
Latitude.
that latitude,
latitude. Sorry.
Yeah.
mhm, and so the idea is that if you live near that crossing, of course, that's going to be really, you're living near that planetary line and that crossing. But if you were away from that crossing, it's about a third in strength or influence, is how
Mm.
Jim Lewis talked about it in terms of its influence. So definitely for, as consulting astrologers, you sort of prioritize like what you talk about in a way. So the planetary lines definitely kind of take more precedent in terms of talking about it. But then, yeah, the in a way, when people actually move where there are no planetary lines, which sometimes can be the goal, because the
Mm-hmm.
idea is that these lines, regardless of how you like them or not in your chart, they become really loud and prominent. And so sometimes actually moving away from a line is one of the reasons people also,
That's why I
consider
moved.
places.
It's a really big reason for me. If you can see on the screen, this is my Mercury MC line. This is where I was
Yeah,
born. So I was and this is
you
where
can
I was
touch
actually
it.
living when I
Oh
was
yeah,
born. Like this is
you
where I
probably,
went from from the hospital to here. So
yeah.
I've lived here my whole life. Like this is where I lived my first 18 years of living, and then I just moved up to New York, which is not very far from that line
Mm.
either. So
And actually keep it on that screen. I wanted
mhm.
to say something about that is that I'll just finish the point with the planetary crossing. It's like if someone moved where there's no planetary lines, the crossings then might be really relevant in terms of that location.
Mm,
But the one you just showed here, where you were born east of the line versus you moved west of the line, that's
right.
actually really interesting in terms of the house placement. So most of the time, because of this system is like usually using like a quadrant house system where you think of the MC as the 10th house. And so you being born east of the line meant that you were in the, sort of like in the ninth house. But then
Mhm.
when you moved west of the line, you end up in the 10th house. And this is where the relocated chart become really, just kind of easier to be able to see that.
That makes
um
sense.
mhm.
But yeah, I was just really I was in a Mercury year, my fourth house Mercury year, and I was so overwhelmed and I was just like, I cannot live on this line anymore. Like I have to move off of this line. And so I drove across the country. I have a really funny story about Amarillo, Texas, where my Mars line is, where we stopped there on a Tuesday.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, wow.
Oh no.
You're like right there.
we literally stopped at this Mexican restaurant that was like a red stucco building or like red clay or something. And got like just like our like we got like tacos or something and we opened it up because we ate in the car and it's just like filled with meat. There's just like meat all over. Like
Mm.
I got fish, but it didn't look like fish. It was just like so much meat and it didn't have much flavor. It was just so Martian. um and it was so hot. It was smoldering hot. It was like
Wow.
over 100 degrees.
I remember
Um
Moses did say that as soon as you're crossing over a line, it's active right away. Because I've ever since I started paying attention, I remember when I was going back to Asia, just kind of had my astrocartography map in front of me. As soon as the plane crossed my Chiron line, it was my first time being called for an emergency medical. There
wow.
was in the plane they were asking for any medical professionals, and in all my times of traveling, that was the first time I had to like show up and be like, yes, I am. And no one else did. It was a huge plane, and I was like, I can't believe I'm
Wow.
the only medical person in
You're the
this
only
plane
one
right
who was
now.
nice enough to get up.
Yeah, and and it was an interesting experience because I had to help someone who was speaking a dialect. She was from China, and then a Chinese person also who speaks Cantonese. So there was three different languages that were being
Mm,
spoken, trying to kind of help each other translate. It was really difficult. It felt very like a Chiron experience, but I
wow.
was like, oh wow, that was totally me crossing my Chiron line. So it was
That's
just like
wild.
active right away.
That is wild. Wow. That is such a cool story. Um, yeah, okay. So I just wanted to show those who are watching the video version that I'm now living in Los Angeles, pretty close to my Neptune ascendant line, which kind of goes through like Santa Barbara, like a little north of Santa Barbara. And I've definitely driven up there before. Um, but yeah, so I'm basically off of those super angular detriment Mercury and Jupiter lines, and just a little bit more comfortable over here and a little bit more, stoned all the time. And no, I'm joking. I'm not joking, but I'm just kind of just in a different space here in La La Land. So yeah, I wanted to show that. And then I think we should also show how to get to the relocated chart, right? So you can do that in astro.com as well. Just go to free horoscopes again. You hover over that. You go to the third column this time, which is, the third column, and you want to go to extended chart selection. So this will take you to the extended chart selection page. What you want to do is go to chart drawing style, right? Or chart type. Chart type. Scroll all the way down. There's a couple of under other charts. There's a relocation chart. You can click that. The next thing that you want to do before you click show chart is go under default settings, and which is it's like kind of two sections underneath the section section. There's a section.
Yeah.
Under that is the houses, and then you go to default settings. You want to change the reference place to wherever you want to relocate that chart to. So I had already changed mine from my birth location to my current location, Los Angeles, California. And then we can just click to show the chart, and that will pull up
So,
the
what house system do
relocated.
you use when you look at a relocated chart?
That's a good
So
question.
I use whole sign houses. I know that most people, like kind of like in the locational astrology field, use porphyry, but
Mhm.
I work with the planetary joys and they really hit. So
Tell us more about that. I remember you talking about it. I'd love to hear more.
Yes.
sure. So when I'm doing relocated charts, something that has, I mean, as people who do client work, I feel like our clients teach us lessons that we're supposed to be learning. And so
100%.
when I do a relocation reading, or when I've been playing with it, I'm like, what places are calling to you? And a lot of people have said like this random spot I've never been to. And I kept on finding Venus in the fifth, Venus in her joy. And I'm like, there has to be something here. And I've been pulling charts where like struggling planets have a little bit more to work with in the house placement. And it's been really, really great. You know, I've been putting like for Saturn returns, like Saturn in the 12th, and you know, just giving those harder placements a little bit of help, I think. Yeah, I wish, you know, if the astro software gods are listening, I would love an astrocartography map showing the planets in their joy alongside the angular maps.
That's awesome. Yes, I love that.
That makes so much sense. And I feel like what you just shared is another one of those examples of that. You don't necessarily always need to or have to move to an angular line.
Hmm.
In terms of the example of Venus in the fifth, that's not an angular Venus, but that's a happy Venus in the fifth
Dude,
house.
I mean, I love that you pulled up that example, that you brought up that example, because me moving from the East Coast to the West Coast makes my eighth house Venus now a 10th house Venus. And I remember when I came to visit here, like a couple years ago, when I was first thinking about moving here in like 2018, I just kept getting complimented everywhere. And now I live here during pandemic time, so I'm not everywhere, but I remember being out to brunch just by myself and sitting on the sidewalk eating, like at a little table, and people just kept complimenting me and like walking by and being like, wow, I love your hair. I love your style. Your whole vibe is just like, and I'm just like literally just eating eggs, like chilling. But my Venus became more visible. And,
Yes.
it's like in a dark house and natally. But yeah, in California, it's just, and I've been doing a lot more Venus work actually.
Actually, I'm
Hopefully my
curious
room's not
about
on
that.
fire because I have a bunch of Venus candles lit right now.
Mm. I have a question for you, Kira, because one of the ways we look at the relocated chart too is like looking at what is the natal story or the natal house that's being brought into prominence and
Mhm.
visibility. So, in your experience with the natal Venus in the eighth house and having it be more visible there, have you found any kind of correlation to how like some eighth house things have propped up more
Mhm.
visibly for you there?
Yeah. Um, that's such a funny thing to think about. I mean, I just feel like maybe not eighth house themes so much. And I've only been here since like August. Um, but I just would say that like me working on my eighth house stuff, working on my Venus, working with
Mm,
Venus has just become a lot. Yeah, I've just been doing that more.
mm,
What the first thing that came to mind when you said that was just like private social media accounts
mm.
that I have that like where I post like,
Soothing.
yeah, I post more like, not full nudes, but like I'll do a little bit
Nice.
more of like, sexy Venus things on these like private accounts.
Mm,
That it's just that feels more like my eighth house Venus coming to the 10th, like,
totally.
you know, that's out there now. It's not you guys cannot find them, but it's out there. So yeah, that's something that came to mind. Um, and just using Alyssa's example about like a place that I've been called to where my Venus would be in the fifth house, my, Venus and Libra would be in the fifth house, is Portugal and Lisbon. And I'm planning if I'm able to, planning to take kind of like a Euro trip next year, and spend a couple months in Europe, and I'm going to kick it off in Lisbon. And I have been there before, and it's a Mercury descendant line for me. But yeah, I would put my Venus in the eighth, and I mean, sorry, in the fifth. And when I did go there, I was just there for work for like maybe 4 days, and I was kind of sick the whole time. But what I did see, I loved, and I just remember being like, I have to come back here. Like, I love this. I love this little city. It's not a little city, but So yeah, I'm excited to go hang out there and see what happens over there. I'm so glad you said that.
Yeah, I feel like there's a lot of ways to give the planets comfort and strength. And so another technique I've been working with is a Vedic concept called Digbala, which is planetary strength. And so in here there's the sun and Mars, they like being on the midheaven, Jupiter and Mercury like being on the ascendant, Saturn in the
Mhm.
seventh, Venus and the moon like being in the fourth. And when I moved to my Saturn line, which the books kind of tell you not to do, I had a great time on my Saturn line. My
Mm.
Saturn is in its domicile. It was given more strength. I feel like before Jupiter was angular for me, and Jupiter was driving my life like a
Mm,
car in GTA, just like crashing
Mm.
into shit and
uh-huh.
like running around. And so giving Saturn a little bit more strength,
Mhm.
that really really helped me out and just helped me personally kind of like embody the Saturn return in a way that I felt had like had a little bit more of a benefit,
Mm,
and helped like my natal promise, like Saturn in the sixth, get
mhm.
some happiness.
I really like that you mentioned that because I feel like that's one way people can utilize and apply locational astrology is like like Saturn return is a big cycle that people arrive at specific ages. And then people can really plan out these times of their life and looking at locational where you could potentially spend it and maybe have a more intimate time with Saturn in a way, like sort of do your Saturn work. And actually, speaking of Saturn, Alyssa, I'm really curious about what you mentioned during the intro about the ancestry lines. Like, I really love the way you talked about just like integrating that part of your history in terms of where you live. Like, and it's something I have heard from your clients too. And I was so excited that we're here today because I was like, oh my god, I'm gonna get to hear about
Before
the
we get into
ancestral work.
that, I realized
Sorry,
we
I'm
didn't
ahead.
really. No. I'm realizing because I'm so excited to get into it, all of it. But I'm realizing we probably didn't do too good of a job in really explaining like what the lines are,
Okay.
and like what it means to be on a line or west of a line or east of a line. So I kind of want to go back to that, and then we can, because I
Yes.
definitely want to get into that. Maybe I'll share my screen again just so we have a visual of what we're talking about one more time. But yeah, can someone, anyone, kind of go into like what it means to like what these lines are, what it means to live on one of them? Yeah.
Do you want to do it, Alyssa?
I can. So when you live on a line, it means that that line is a planet that is hitting one of your angles. And so what Kira is showing right now is the Mercury midheaven line. And, the planets rise, they fall, they culminate, when you look at this astrocartography map, you're seeing how the planets move over, or a projection of how the planets are rising and descending on the map. And so when we're talking about east versus west of a line, that planet can, you know, it's still aspecting those places,
Mm-hmm.
but they can be either cadent or angular. So east of a line is cadent, west of a line is angular if you're using
Mm-hmm.
a quadrant house system.
Mm-hmm.
And with these lines, you have an orb of about, I use an orb of 300 miles.
Okay.
Um, Jim is like fast and loose with what he names as an orb in here. And so like I
Mm-hmm.
just personally use that. It's not it's not like doctrine when we're using this
Mm-hmm.
technique.
And I use the zodiacal degree equivalent because I'm geographically, I just cannot imagine what 300 miles look like, even if you could measure it on the screen. So, zodiacally, at least I know Sam Reynolds talks about 5 degrees as still, a planet conjoined an angle,
Mhm.
as like that's a line, that's a strong line. But Moses Sirikart uses 8 degree orbs. So I have been using 8 degrees as an orb, zodiacally.
Cool. This is where I want to go to this summer. I want to go to my sun line on my sun year. Mexico City. It's actually way closer to, like, if I pull up my relocated chart from Mexico City, it's like an exact sun line.
Yeah, and the sun
Sun
loves being on the
midheaven.
midheaven, so
Yeah.
I think you should go.
I really want to go. I just need to find someone to go
And
with.
speaking of that, actually, the east and west of line, in some ways, depending on the angle, some of them are a little bit easier than others. So, for example,
Mhm.
like the MC lines, if you're east of a line, it lands on the ninth. As opposed to if you're east of an ascendant line, it lands in the 12th house. So that's
Mhm.
something to consider, like the difference of, like in a way, like a cadent ninth house is definitely in, at least in terms of the significations of that house, is a bit easier to deal with than a 12th house, for example.
Right.
Um,
And so, if I were to say move to Mexico City or just go there, where my sun midheaven line is, what that means is that if my chart were, like, if my chart were, if I were to be born in Mexico City, the
mhm,
sun would have been exactly on the midheaven, like
culminating.
culminating at the top of the sky, super, high noon basically.
Mhm,
And I was born at 1:20 p.m. So when the sun was pretty much up there. But my natal chart, it's in the ninth house. So moving just a little bit west, closer to that sun midheaven line. And what that will look like. So, I have a Scorpio sun, for the sun to be on the midheaven, that I would think would probably be good for career stuff for me, or just to be seen in general. I would imagine when I'm there, it'd probably be very noticed. Um, and yeah, probably be really good for, like, I probably take some really hot photos there or something. Um, what else would you say about, like, moving to your sun midheaven line, for example?
I think with like the sun midheaven, like when I saw this as a vacation, I'm like, oh, you're gonna be sunbathing. Like you're gonna be
Mhm.
out there, like soaking it
Yeah.
in. I think it depends on the natal placement, right? And so if you have sun in Aries and your sun is exalted, you're gonna be noticed, and it's gonna be like really kind of like easy for you to kind of take in that attention.
Mhm, mhm.
I have a sun in Aquarius, and
Mm.
when I was on my sun line, I loved attention. I also needed breaks. And
Mm.
so the sun line is great for getting noticed. It's great for doing things that like reaffirm your identity. And
Mm.
so if we're gonna be like I always think of like putting on body glitter and like running around outside during Pride as like a a
Yeah,
very like sun midheaven or like sun line activity, which I have done on my sun line and
I
was
love
very
that. Hell yeah.
I feel like that's so great. I love that you took it there.
Mhm.
Yeah, we miss having to gather. So I and that's perfect. I feel like this is actually a really good exercise to think a lot about the natal promise in some way, because when we move to a planetary line, I have found you get to really experience that planet on an archetypal level, and in some way, aside from what it means for you natally. So, being a Scorpio sun, natally it's in the ninth house. As an astrologer, technically this is a promising place for your career, right?
Mhm.
Because you're moving that like ninth house sun to your midheaven. So there's like, in a way, like more visibility in terms of your astrology work, as well as when I think of experiences that are a lot more external or objective, wherein potentially you meet very solar like people as well, and
Mhm.
you experience like solar like relationships, especially maybe with people who are very visible, prominent authority figures, because those are what we think of in terms of the midheaven.
Mhm.
Or you come across people who kind of embody that sun midheaven kind of quality about them, because I often think of also the midheaven as like the aspirational self as opposed to the ascendant as like the self. And so you might sort of like really experience a lot of like solar principles. So, like I guess solar type folks are like, yeah, very shiny, very warm and generous. In some, I guess in some spaces they can be like wealthy and rich, right? Like when I think of royalty.
Mhm.
um, and in general too, I think when we think of the sun as it's the spirit, it's the will. So there's those kind of really traditional significations as well that you can really kind of imagine how that could be like in that place.
Awesome. So, part of this means, like, I wouldn't, kind of getting to the dignity discussion, but a line that I probably would not want to move to is my Mars midheaven line, or any Mars line really. um because, and my
Yes.
sun and my Mars are pretty closely conjunct too, by like 3 degrees. So I would want to stay closer to my sun line and not go over to my Mars line, particularly because I was born in the daytime, and therefore my
Mm.
Mars is an out of sect, or contrary to the sect malefic, and therefore can manifest as more challenging, as opposed to, say, my Saturn line, which I have a Saturn line that goes through Sydney, Australia, and I've always wanted to go there, and I really considered moving there for a while when I was younger. And I still want to visit, but I have this Saturn IC line going there, and I have the person who edits this podcast lives in Sydney. Friend of the pod who's been on a couple of times, Scarlett Coote also lives in Sydney. So I've always had friends from Australia, specifically Sydney. And Saturn does rule my 11th house of friends, but yeah, I would much more consider moving to a Saturn line, because of the my Saturn is less difficult to work with than, say, a Mars line, which is like part of the reason why I don't think I'm ever going to go to India. Because my Mars and Pluto lines and Sun line runs straight through the country. So yeah, maybe we should kind of talk a little bit about, have a little bit of the dignity discussion, because I think that's a really important part of all of this, is that you don't want to move to any line just because, even if you do have a very dignified Mars, such as I do, just because it's dignified by sign doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the most auspicious or constructive place to work, to move to or to visit. So yeah, does anyone want to get started by talking about like what we mean by that? I mean, Charm just did an amazing webinar for us at Fresh Voices just last week about this topic in particular. So Charm, do you want to get started?
Sure. I don't know if Alyssa, you were gonna say something else before the screen was not shared anymore.
I will wait for you, Charm, because I
Oh,
think it's important.
yeah, I think what you illustrated actually about your sun line in that map that is conjoined Pluto and Mars in your chart, Kira, is actually a good point to think about, because depending on how someone's birth chart is like, you almost cannot isolate planets, because then it would really depend on their relationship with other planets. So, in a way, if you are born with a Sun Mars conjunction, anytime you're following that sun line, you're technically also following Mars. In the presentation I did for Fresh Voices, I used Jungkook's chart. He has a very close Venus Saturn opposition in his chart. And if he was to follow his Venus line, he has a Venus in Libra in the first natally, which is like, really nice. But then he has a Saturn Aries closely opposing it. And so, in a way, if he was to follow his Venus line everywhere, he's technically also following a Saturn line, because that relationship will always remain the same. So what we're trying to say is that not necessarily all Venus or Jupiter lines are always necessarily good, or like that all Mars and Saturn lines are bad. I would say like the outer planets is probably a whole different conversation. um, but I do recommend people to look at what are the natal conditions of the planets. And you can determine this through different ways, definitely looking at your sect. So, are you a day chart or a night chart? Essential dignity is definitely like at the heart of assessing planetary conditions. So, that's when we talk about planets being in particular zodiacal signs as having more, sort of strength or struggle. The natal house placement is also something to consider, as well as the aspects that planets have with either the benefics or the malefics, and as well as solar phases, like in terms of, is this planet a retrograde planet? Is it, combust or under the sun's beams? In a way, this is where in a lot of people's training and education in astrology can become really applicable in this kind of astrology, where if people already know, for example, essential dignity is something people get to learn if they start studying like traditional astrology. And even sometimes in modern astrology they do talk about essential dignity a little bit, is that you get to understand these concepts and how does it apply in locational astrology.
So I just pulled up my my relocated chart for Mexico City just to illustrate what it would look like, you know, from looking at the map to looking at it as a chart. And you can see it's like my sun midheaven line. There, it's pretty much like exactly on there, and it puts my sun in the 10th house, both quadrant and whole sign. And it keeps my Pluto and my Mars over in the 9th house. So yeah, that's just to illustrate what that looks like, and also to show that, like, you know, we can't get away from that Mars. And I think also it's important to know that, like, okay, just because I'm moving to a Sun midheaven line, which sounds really great, like what else is moving in my chart? What else kind of becomes angular? I don't have anything kind of angular to that Sun, but it does make me an Aquarius rising with Saturn in the first house. It kind of moves my sect light into the 8th house, and you know, it moves things around a little bit. I'm still really obsessed with this and like really want to go see what it's like. But what I will say is last time I was on a sun, maybe I'll just look at it. I think I was in Austin, Texas. Um, and I think that was, yeah, so I was very close to my sun midheaven line in Austin, Texas as well, but the sun was on the 9th house side of it. I was there for work, but I remember I had really good sex, basically, like with this guy that like I kind of used to work with. And yeah, I remember being like, oh, this is what the sun line's all about. I love this. And there's this feeling of like whenever my Scorpio stuff becomes like activated, or there's like like Mars and Scorpio transits through or something like that, there's this like like reminder of like, oh yeah, I'm a fucking Scorpio, like I'm powerful. And I felt that way in Austin. I felt like, oh yeah, like I felt that powerful, like, you know, that Martian in domicile influence that, you know, sometimes I get in mutable land and I'm just like detrimented Sally over here. And I forget I have like, you know, the very domiciled Mars. And so yeah, I'm looking forward to going to that sun line again, hopefully in Mexico this time, and seeing what it's like. I'm definitely going to report back. So um yeah, go ahead, Alyssa.
Yeah, I just feel like planetary condition is super important because, like, if you had like a sixth house Mars, Kira, I might move you to the Saturn midheaven line because, like, you might want to experience like that sixth house Mars, like being really seen for work, right? And so, like,
Mhm.
you know, sect and dignity play a role. And like, you also have to be, if you're going to be using this as an astrological tool, there is no perfect like house placement, right? So, like, the chart is going to shout out the good things about that placement. You're also going to have some of the challenges, right? Like, you know, if that Mars is afflicted by aspect in any kind of way, you're going to be working through that affliction as well.
Mhm. Mhm.
Exactly. Yeah. Um Yeah, that's a good point. It's just I wonder a lot about like moving back, like moving to a Jupiter line, for instance. Like I'm hoping to visit it next year in Italy. I have a Jupiter IC line that kind of goes through Italy, but it is like a detrimented Jupiter, and I'm really curious what that's going to be like. Um, as opposed to maybe moving to one of my domiciled planets lines. I'm hoping that, you know, I meet someone from Ethiopia or something. So I have this Venus moon opposition that in Ethiopia they kind of all come together, and
Mm.
I'm like, of course, I love Ethiopian food. And this is something I wanted to bring up actually, that Jen Zart brought up in her lecture about this at NORWAC 2020, which is that sometimes it just looks like attracting people or being attracted to a culture or being attracted to a food of that place, where you have particular lines. And I'm like, I fucking die for Ethiopian food. Like, makes sense. And it's also, you know, I'm not Ethiopian, but I get asked very often if I am. And yeah, it's just like one of those things where I'm like, I want to see what it's like to go there, because I feel so connected to, you know, that land and like that culture, even that food. And yeah, I love that. Have you guys had any experience with that? Like, I'm just thinking about, like, I love Indian food too, and I have like my Sun, Mars, Pluto lines going through India.
I have a lot to say on this actually, because I feel like locational astrology has actually helped me like understand and refine my politics on like relationships and cultural appropriation, because what I've learned through locational is that I feel like the lines don't show up as much as like a surface level, like I like this thing, because like I feel like it just hasn't manifested for me that way. But I think like the experience of the restaurant, right? Like the people you're talking to in the restaurant, the art that's up in the restaurant, like it's
The music that's playing, the
right.
ambiance, yeah.
And so it's what I've seen is like, you know, looking at the lines, and I have a lot of my friends are immigrants, a lot of my friends are from different places, like understanding that I've learned about that planet through our friendship and through our relationship, and like understanding them on a deeper level, and like how that place has informed their understanding of the world.
Mhm.
And when it comes to, interacting with that culture, I realized that like developing a deep relationship to it, understanding the history of resistance, and
Mhm.
understanding why, like how that culture has been shaped, instead of just like wearing it or
Mhm.
parading it around, has been a way for me to like be like, oh, like this is the difference between appreciation and appropriation, and has just helped my politics. It's weird to think about astrology supporting our political journeys, but that's just how it's happened for me.
Well, that
Mhm.
makes so much sense. And that was one of my inspiration for my presentation with the Visionary Astrology Conference, is that as I've been learning locational astrology since 2019, I was getting really frustrated by a lot of the lens with which it is taught, which is really steeped in, I think, for lack of a better word, like just not a lot of understanding of how even like colonialism and neo-colonialism, in terms of the context of tourism, and how that really kind of trickles down to people's mobility and people's ability, um, to be able to move around depending on, like, I guess, where they're coming from. So this is where like even concept of citizenship comes in, right? Like depending on what kind of passport you carry kind of determines really how you're able to move around in the world.
Mhm.
And in a sense, I was curious about how we could, I guess, reframe or even have better creative utility of locational astrology, not just out of, not just always from a place of, exploration
Mhm.
and enjoyment, but also like what you mentioned, Alyssa, how like our relationships has enriched even our own understanding of our own politics, for example. It's really complicated because it's really hard to, I feel like this is one of those ongoing commitment that people would have to have around how we take up space. And like even thinking about, um I was thinking about in Philippines, for example, how it's a product of like neo-colonialism, wherein the tourism industry is something that a lot of the local people rely on, but at the same time, on a global scale, it's really like really awful in terms of how it creates a dynamic between the, sort of like, I would say, like the Western world's access to like more of, sort of like the divide of the developing and the developed world, like on that global scale. It creates this really like power dynamics among people. And so it's interesting to bring this up, like around our own exploration of our planetary lines and what that means. And I don't have a lot of solution other than people really have to continue educating ourselves. And we had this conversation before we started recording about teachers and how, yes, you can learn the astrological techniques, but I feel like part of continuing this practice is you have to continue maybe some kind of decolonial education, for example. I know, Alyssa, you had some things to
Yeah.
say about that.
I mean, I just love being your colleague, Charm. You know, like you're so wonderful. And, you know, as you were talking, I was also thinking about my own experience as being a movement worker, traveling all over the country and seeing the country through the eyes of people like me who are working class and not seeing it as a tourist. You know, like I was working a lot of the time. And seeing how the hospitality industry, you know, understanding that if I'm going to a hotel and there's a strike, I don't cross the picket line. If there's an ongoing struggle against Airbnb, I'm going to not book an Airbnb in solidarity with the workers who are fighting against, you know, Airbnb as a corporation. Or, you know, little things like making sure I tip my housekeeper and making sure that I'm like redistributing wealth, even if, you know, in theory, we're supposed to be taking a break on vacation, because I also think that capitalism works us so hard that sometimes people travel and they feel like they can do whatever the hell they want because they've earned it, instead of being in relationship and in solidarity and learning about the place you're traveling to and what people are asking for and what people need. Because, you know, on one hand, I think we can get in the trap of being like the perfect activist and feeling super guilty for even wanting a break. But on the other hand, there are things that we can do and places that we can join in to like help us have a relationship to the place that is in integrity with ourselves.
It's very, yeah, it's a very complicated process, I think, at least for people who are wanting to unpack these things about how we move in the world. And yeah, I love that we brought that to that conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Another thing to kind of piggyback off of that is, you know, people from a certain place where you have lines kind of coming into your life. And I've seen that's something Jen's art brought up in her lecture, and it's something I've kind of just noticed and seen through other people, and you know, not so much clients, but certainly just through other astro friends. Have you guys had any of that or experienced any of that?
Well, yeah, I mean, I find like in terms of the delineation part, at least from client work, I have been, I feel like I'm definitely in the part where I'm collecting data, even though I don't have like a very structured way of collecting data. It's all in my brain. But I'm really thinking a lot about how relationships show up, or the kinds of people that show up in people's lives, depending on where they relocate. And that sometimes, and I think that's what like I really got out of studying a bit more traditional techniques, is that some of the ways our chart shows up is not always the most personalized, or is not the most subjective manifestation, but actually a lot of what happens around us and the kinds of people we end up interacting with. I don't know if that answered your question.
I think I think so. Yeah. Melissa, do you have something to add?
Yeah, I mean, one of the reasons I felt grief when I first read the chart is I also thought about like all the people in my hometown who have kind of been like fed like the lies of xenophobia, like we should be afraid of people who are immigrants, and how much they're losing out on like not having friends or, you know, people in their lives that are different from them, and the planetary relationships that come along with that, you know, they're only. And so like when I looked at my friends' charts, we did this really fun thing when I first learned it. And I was like, you're here on my chart. You're here on my chart. You're my moon. You're my Venus, you know, like, and we would talk about, you know, kind of in a cute way, like, you're my planet friend.
I love
So,
that.
yeah.
That's really sweet.
And actually, speaking of like the planetary condition conversation, is that in many ways, like doing the assessment is like a part of the process. And I feel like the gift of our time is that we get to reframe a lot of what does it mean to have a detriment, you know, Jupiter in detriment or Jupiter in exile. And in a way, when you move to a line where it highlights like maybe a part of your chart that is difficult, like you get an opportunity in a way perhaps to like build a relationship with that planet in your chart, or even like kind of really get to know what does this, how has your experiences been with this planet as well, you know, up until this life, and you know how could you reframe or even like maybe remediate, I know that's an official term, moving forward, you know, this relationship with this hard planet, for example. Yeah, I just thought about that.
Awesome. Well, something that we haven't talked about yet that I want to get into is local space. And I know, Alyssia, you do more of this than Charm does. And I've only had brief introductions to what it is, I think mostly through Jen's arts lecture. But yeah, do you want to kind of break down what it even is? I'm going to, as you do that, I'm going to, well, actually, real quick, let me just show folks how to pull that up on astro.com. So there's two ways you can look at the local space kind of like interactive chart, and you can kind of look at your local space chart, which I printed out. I'm excited to look at it. But basically, you want to go back to the free horoscopes tab, hover over that. In the third column, the first button on the top right in the third column, and this is your AstroClick local space lines. And what you'll be looking at is sort of like a you're here, like this is where you are. What is it called? Like a pin, or like a kind of like a locational icon that shows like where you were born, and then like colored lines sort of radiating out from that point. So, Alyssia, do you want to explain local space and sort of describe what we're seeing?
Absolutely. So, local space was created by Michael Irvine in the 1970s and has been used to talk about kind of like our how the planets feel in like at the heart of things. So this is more less about like your outside interactions and more about kind of like the home and how you're feeling internally. And so I've been using local space to help my clients redecorate their rooms and to kind of like give honor to the planets in their day-to-day lives. And so like for instance, you know, I've consulted with folks who have had like Saturn be really, really loud by transit. And so by kind of like shifting the way their rooms are, or the way, you know, the way they're experiencing like kind of like their everyday life in the house, I can remediate through shifting around the space and kind of like giving something to Saturn, but maybe emphasizing like Jupiter or Venus, or using the directions of those local space lines to give voice to the planets.
Awesome.
And I think also on a technical level, this is the part where I personally have difficulty explaining, but I'm going to attempt, is that the local space map that we're looking at currently is a projection of the horizon. So Sam Reynolds thinks about local space as more locational, whereas astrocartography is more directional, or maybe I have it mixed. I have to
No,
check
you're
my
right,
notes.
Charm.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
I apologize. But so in a way, this is actually different from the astrocartography map. And I love how you've been using it, Alyssa, in terms of helping your clients.
Yeah, so how would you even do that? Like what are we looking so what we're looking at basically is what is as if we were looking the way I've understood it is if like, you're in a space and you can sort of orient yourself 360 in a space to sort of like pick up a particular line. Is that sort of what we're
Yes.
looking at? So like
That,
Yeah.
in
yeah.
the room I'm in, I could like kind of drop a coordinate here and say, okay, Venus is this way and kind of
Mm.
turn towards the Venus line, maybe put a Venus altar there. Is that sort of what you mean?
It's literally a planetary compass of your chart, basically.
Mm,
Yeah.
cool.
So you're looking at like I guess when you show how to pull up a local space chart,
Mm-hmm. I can
you
do that
can
now.
you can actually use that chart as the kind of compass, literally like as you would orient yourself in the cardinal directions, like the north, south,
Mm,
east, west,
yeah.
literally.
Let me show y'all how to pull that up if you're watching the video version. You would go back to extended chart selection, which is again, hover over free horoscopes, the third column on the right. There's an extended chart selection link. You would go there. And similarly, you're going to go to chart type, scroll to the bottom, and there's a local space chart. If you moved like I have, you might want to look at your local space relocation chart, which is what I'm going to pull up. And yeah, that basically gives you the the little compass that we're looking at.
Yeah, these directions. And so the way you can maybe use it like in your space is like say you have a schematic, you're gonna overlay that chart based on the directions on the schematic of your place. And that might be helpful if like you're like, where the hell do I put a Jupiter altar, right? And I also have used this on myself, like I was having a lot of issues with getting started on writing. And then I made a little nook, a creative nook, where I'm working with my Mars, the direction of my Mars. And it's helped me immensely in just like staying focused and having the energy and wherewithal to do these things. And so there's a lot of different ways you can apply it.
Yeah, I feel like there's so much magical slash mundane opportunities to apply local space. And in a way, like you can really zoom out, like you do this in terms of your home, but then you can also zoom out in terms of, oh yeah, anytime you go due west in your local community, you're essentially following your Jupiter line in terms of looking at the chart that's in front of us. Or
Mhm.
that if you're moving because we're in the northern hemisphere, the midheaven is always due south. But if you're sort of moving northeast, you're moving through your moon line, and the opposite is the Venus line. So it's interesting also to, I guess, explore your own relationship to your local community using local space. Um,
Yeah, I feel like the thing that everyone wants to know when we're doing astrolocality is like, how am I gonna find my true love?
the love of my
And
Please tell
life.
me.
and sometimes I'll suggest, depending on, even the bound ruler of like a planetary placement. So like, it might not be your Venus line, if the bound ruler of your Venus is like Mars, I might put you towards Mars and I'll be like, go to a bar in that direction.
Mhm.
Or like go to the park, like find a social thing there and maybe, like that direction might hit the spot in terms of the materiality of finding what you're looking for on that line.
I can picture people taking notes.
I know.
Just
I'm like, okay, I'm gonna go to my Mercury line then. Southeast, got it.
Yeah, I want to like give a shout out specifically to Jen's art for kind of like making me rethink of the bounds, like using the bounds in locational astrology. And for folks who are kind of new to this part of essential dignity, the bounds describe how shit gets done. And so the bounds are when a sign is like split into 5 sections, and they're all ruled by a traditional planet. And you know, if your Venus is in the bound of a specific planet, that other planet is going to help you manifest. Or I feel like manifesting is so loaded, but like it's going to help you get from point A to point B.
It gets shit done, like you said.
Yeah,
I love
like
that so much. It's
the manager,
clicking.
like the production manager.
Wow, it's
Yeah.
clicking things in my head. And I love your example about the bar on that direction, because when I think of bound rulerships too, I think of a lot of uh no, I'm mixing it with triplicity. I apologize. I take that back, because I was thinking of triplicity rulers as, you know, sort of access to associations or connections. But that's not bound rulerships.
Yeah, I mean, triplets, like all these levels of essential dignity help us have nuance in the way we approach this, right? And so, you know, the triplicity ruler might manifest as like a wingman, you know, like a friend who's going to introduce you to a whole bunch of places, and maybe they're from one of those lines and like they correspond with that planet. I really think like, you know, like please don't be looking for people of a specific ethnicity or race based on the planet. But
what not to do.
yeah, how not to use this. But I do think that, you know, like when you look at your relationships, or at least for me, when I started like really, really digging deep and looking at my relationships and looking at the charts of the people around me, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like you brought me to this party, and we went to this party and you introduced me to everyone, and then I like went home with this person and it was really great, but like you were the triplicity.
You were the triplicity, ruler of the sect in favor. I'm such a fan of that long phrase.
Oh, we are such chads.
We're just nerds.
We're just such astro nerds. Anything else about local space that's coming up for you guys? Or anything about local space? I'll start there. I'm excited to play around with it for sure. I'm excited to use that. Maybe I should go, because my 7th house lord is Mercury in its own terms, and my Venus is also in the terms of Mercury. So I'm sort of like, let me follow that Mercury local space line, see where it takes me. But I kind of just wanted to see if you guys had any other, you know, cool astrocartography, astrolocation, whatever, like stories or experiences or any other anecdotes to share.
I think like it's gonna, when folks like are looking this up, they're gonna be like disappointed if they see a line in the ocean. Everyone has lines in the ocean. And so it does not mean that it is doom and gloom if your Venus line is in the ocean. If your Venus has a bound ruler, your Venus, you know, has parents across the whole chart. And so I think, you know, in terms of importance, like the lines are important, but there's other ways to find what you're looking for instead of like the straightforward just up and down.
That's a good
And that
point.
also, yes, Venus is the sort of the significator of relationships, but also in your birth chart, it could be like your fifth house and seventh house ruler. So that could be a completely different planet. So you have options.
Mm-hmm.
You're not stuck with just Venus, like what you're saying about checking out the bound rulers. I mean, I don't have any story, but that looking forward, I am on in the process of moving to the West Coast, to Vancouver Island, and it because I'm trying to move away from my Mars IC line, and I what I'm anticipating is that I'm moving where my moon will become angular. It would be like a moon descendant line, as well as actually it will also be my sun MC line.
Mm.
So which would be a very interesting experience for me because my luminaries in my chart are actually in dark houses.
Mm.
So then they become visible there. And when I think about a lot of the family heartbreak and, sort of grief that I've experienced where I am currently. And when I think of my moon and I think of the luminaries a lot as also relating to like lineage and family of origin stories, in how in my birth chart, at least my moon is one of the most, like in terms of planetary condition, is one of the most beat up planets in my chart, that I imagine myself actually doing a lot of probably emotional and healing work in relation to all the Mars IC experiences I've had here. So that's something I'm anticipating. I don't have stories yet, but I'm sure I will at some point.
Mm. I'm excited. I'm excited for you to get out west and to, yeah, see how it is for you.
Yeah, I have one story of going to London and um on the flight traveling all over the lines and like crying on one of the lines, like one of the like the Chiron line when I passed over it, and I always cry on that flight, on transatlantic flights. But when I arrived into London, like my 12th house moon all of a sudden became angular, and it was a lot of healing experiences from other people. And so my family is kind of fragmented in the States. And then I had like wonderful family experiences and was
Mm,
super shocked and was
mm,
like this is what this placement means. It helped me kind of like untangle the moon from all of the it's one of the most aspected planets in my chart. And
mm,
so it helped me like isolate the moon and be like,
mm,
okay, this is what you're about. This is your needs. Another fun thing is when the ascendant shifts. So I went from a Leo rising to a Libra rising, and
mm,
my Tinder, without me even doing anything, blew the fuck up.
mm.
Love to hear it.
And so the shift in the ascendant has been a welcome surprise in a lot of
Mm.
places.
Is that
Yeah.
because of the ruler of the ascendant change? Is that what you
Yes.
mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, just moving out here and again, moving from a detrimented chart ruler and detrimented angle rulers now to, I mean, three out of the four angles are domiciled, Saturn ruling the first. I have Mars and Scorpio, which would rule the fourth, and then Venus and Libra would rule, right? Am I doing this right? Not the fourth. Yeah, no, yeah. Mars would rule the fourth. Venus and Libra rules the 10th. Brain. I'm trying to picture my chart turned, and I could just look at it right now. But regardless, just that yeah, it feels I'm finally able to like really plant plant my feet and like kind of, this is the first time I ever lived alone in my life. This is the first time I've ever been able to like provide for myself in this way, and it's so much
Mm,
more like domiciled and less
mm,
so like feeling like I'm just like trying to trying to get trying to keep it together. Like I very much am always trying to keep it together still, but just in terms of like the way that my life has shifted since I've gotten here, and being able to just like do my own thing, and you know it's just a lot different. So yeah, I would totally agree with that. Just like the ruler of the ascendant shift would be very potent.
Mhm. Yeah,
Yeah.
because the responsibility of the planet in that location changes a bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it's always interesting to see.
Awesome. Well, any last thoughts? Anything else to share? We've been on for a bit. I am just so grateful that you two came on and that we were able to do this, put this together. Let's let the people know how to find you. Charm, how about tell us where we can find you.
Yeah, I do offer locational astrology consultations, and I'm hoping to put it out there sometime in the next month. That I'm also gonna start doing locational astrology consultations with forecasting, so like a year ahead, together with a locational consult, because I find that also very useful together. So people can find me on the internet. So my website is charmastrology.com, and on Instagram and Facebook I am at Charm Astrology, and on Twitter I'm at charm underscore astrology.
Awesome. And yeah, just plugging again, Charm just did a webinar with us on
Mm.
locational astrology, and what was it called?
So it's locational astrology and assessing planetary condition. Yeah, with fresh
Cool.
voices.
Yeah. And that's available on the Fresh Voices website for like $30 if you want to buy it, and you'll have it forever. And freshvoicesandastrology.com. Alyssa, how do we find you?
So I also offer locational astrology consultations. You can go to praxisastrology.com/book. And if you like what I'm saying, you want to read more of my writing, I have a Patreon. I'm Praxis Astrology on Patreon. On Twitter, I'm at Praxis Astrology, but on Instagram, I'm Praxis_astrology. So those are the ways you can find me and check me out.
Cool. And we'll have everything linked below as well. Um, Thank you guys. This was great.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.